Thank you.
Sounds ready when you're ready.
Okay. Thank you. Shall I give you a nod? My thesis focused on the Agachaditos street food stalls of El Alto in Bolivia, which is so named because customers squat on low stools to eat. They're a specific type of stall that serve traditional food as a main meal, and they're important in tackling a growing problem globally, that of urban food insecurity. As cities expand at breakneck speed, especially in the developing world, states often find it hard to keep up in terms of infrastructure and service provision. And this means there can be logistical problems with how food reaches the city from the countryside. And in the context of these gaps left by the state, what's also expanding globally is the size of the informal sector, where systems operate outside the realm of state regulation and are heavily based in social networks with other economic actors. In El Alto, which is often described as Bolivia's indigenous city, it's the informal systems that are dominant and mainstream. They're heavily based in indigenous Aymara ethnicity, and it's estimated that they're responsible for around 90% of the city's food supply. Street food vendors themselves are an important node in this network that links countryside and city. They serve prepared food at a low cost at different points around the city, and they cater very directly to the needs of an urban consumer in terms of time saving, affordability, and location. So in my thesis, I wanted to focus on street food vendors, and I wanted to look at the compatibility of their social networks with the social issue of food security. My research question was, what forms of networks are vendors' activities based in, and how do these contribute to food security in the city? And the FAO breaks down the concept of food security into different pillars, and the ones which are relevant in the urban context are access, economic and physical, preference, utilization, which with street food generally relates mostly to food hygiene, and then the stability of the other pillars over time. To examine my research question, I used a multi-stage methodology over 16 weeks. I started off simply by sitting in street food stalls, eating the food and chatting with vendors, and I established close contact with 12 of them. My original plan was to perform semi-structured recorded interviews with these 12, but I hit a pitfall when the first vendor that I spoke to refused to speak to me when she saw my recorder and saw me taking notes, even though we'd developed quite a trustful relationship over time. And I think that's because informal economic actors are used to hiding their business activity and are very mistrustful of official recording techniques. So I decided that the data loss would be comparably lower if I memorized unstructured interviews and wrote them down later as part of an ethnographic methodology where I also worked as a street food vendor's assistant and accompanied vendors on things like market trips. And I triangulated the methodology with a quantitative consumer survey. So I'll now move on to talk to you about my research findings. I identified 5 main categories of social networks that are used by vendors, and I found that they contributed to food security in the city in 2 main ways: by reducing vendors' costs, which translated into lower prices for the consumer, and more surprisingly, regulating food hygiene. So firstly, vendors use family-based networks to reduce their costs. Family members help in the vendor's business, and different family businesses interlink to reduce each other's costs. And vendors also bring ingredients directly into the city from family plots that they have in the countryside. The casero relationship is a deeply loyal customer-supplier relationship that's heavily ingrained in the culture. Vendors have their casero suppliers to ensure high quality at a low price, but in turn, vendors' businesses are dependent on their loyal casero customers, meaning they're driven, for example, to regulate food hygiene so as not to lose those customers. Most vendors are part of an association, which is like a trade union, and complex social relations run through them, which is solidified through social events rooted in Aymara culture. The associations are important in providing economic stability and supporting the vendor's business. Vendors use their existing friendships to lower their costs in a number of ways, and that translates into lower prices for the customer because of vendors' competition with other vendors. One vendor even flirts with her butcher to get her meat at cost value, so her dishes are much cheaper than those of the competition. And there's also an important solidarity based in Aymara identity, where practices are rooted in traditional Aymara values of solidarity, reciprocity, and responsibility to the community. And this provides support for the vendors, but it also means that the vendors themselves are socially conscious, for example, gifting food to the needy or those who can't afford it. Vendors use their extensive contacts as an up-to-date information source to source scarce ingredients such as quinoa, now in Bolivia, and to get news much faster than the television or radio for things like transport strikes which might affect their business. So vendors use their networks in a number of ways to lower their costs, which translates into economic access for the consumer. The importance of trust and loyalty in their social networks mean they're focused on catering to consumer preference and self-regulating hygiene. And the institutionality of Aymara values provides stability to the other pillars and a system that's socially conscious. So while there are obvious problems with such informal systems, they're currently absent from development policy, and this ignores their contribution to food security. So while policies currently favour formalisation, perhaps current systems should be supported and improved rather than completely changed. Street food vendors and the informal systems in which they operate play an important role in food security in El Alto, and more attention should be paid to them when designing food security policy. That brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for listening.